Algorithmic systems are making high-stakes decisions across the Indian economy, but the traditional legal system is structurally unequipped to determine who pays when those decisions cause harm. Machine learning models are already integrated into healthcare diagnostics, financial credit scoring, and public services. Yet the regulatory mechanisms governing these tools have not evolved to match their deployment. India currently operates without a standalone statutory law for artificial intelligence. When an AI system fails, courts are forced to retrofit general-purpose statutes, like the Consumer Protection Act or the Information Technology Act, to adjudicate the damage. These legacy frameworks rely on linear causation. A plaintiff must prove a direct chain. Observable conduct results in an identifiable fault causing harm. This requires a physical product. If brakes fail, investigators isolate the defect and assign strict liability. Currently, Indian law assumes human-centric linear decision-making. Applying that logic to the autonomous, non-deterministic behavior of an algorithmic model causes the legal framework to collapse. The collapse occurs because complex AI operates as a black box. The internal processing parameters are mathematically opaque, meaning developers themselves often cannot trace exactly how specific data inputs resulted in specific outputs. Machine learning models do not follow static, pre-programmed instructions. They are self-learning. They adapt their logic based on the volume and type of data they ingest over time. Building and running these systems requires a deeply fragmented value chain. An application involves separate entities, acting as dataset curators and software developers, complex system integrators, and final deployers. This chart compares the two paradigms. The left shows the clear chain of custody required by current law. The right maps the diffused reality of AI, where biased training data, unpredictable user queries, and autonomous model updates interact simultaneously. When an error occurs, such as a discriminatory hiring screen or a faulty loan rejection, the causal link dissolves entirely. A claimant cannot isolate the exact mechanism of failure because the fault is distributed across multiple interacting variables. This structural complexity immediately halts legal action. Proving fault requires access to proprietary source code, training parameters, and audit logs, data that companies keep strictly confidential, and that average claimants have no procedural right to demand. In the current legal vacuum, the algorithmic black box functions as a shield. Harms occur, but they go unremedied because the source of the failure cannot be translated into traditional legal evidence. Because proving technical causality is a procedural dead end, sector-specific regulators in India are abandoning the search for root causes and engineering workarounds based on market visibility. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, recently implemented targeted amendments governing the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning tools by market intermediaries. SEBI bypassed the technical complexities by imposing visibility-based strict liability. The legal responsibility falls squarely on the entity directly interacting with the consumer, regardless of who originally coded the algorithm. Under this framework, the deploying institution is held solely responsible for the integrity of investor data, the accuracy of the AI's outputs, and total regulatory compliance. This model guarantees an identifiable target for enforcement actions. It prioritizes consumer trust and immediate oversight over the granular realities of software engineering. Other regulators are adopting similar strategies. The Reserve Bank of India has established a dedicated committee to draft equivalent guardrails for responsible AI enablement across the entire banking sector. These regulatory patches create immediate accountability, but they concentrate the full burden of failure on the deploying companies. A bank or exchange assumes massive liability risk simply by integrating a third-party tool. Beyond financial regulations, there is an ongoing push within the Indian Parliament to build a comprehensive statutory foundation for algorithmic accountability. Lok Sabha Bill 59 of 2025 proposes a formal ethics and accountability framework, specifically targeting systems deployed in decision-making and mass surveillance. Sections 3 and 5 draw strict operational boundaries. They mandate that any AI system used in high-stakes environments, like law enforcement, credit scoring, and employment, is legally barred from discriminating on the basis of race, religion, or gender. Section 6 attacks the black box directly through a transparency mandate. Developers would be legally required to disclose their training data methodologies and provide interpretable, human-readable reasons for any automated decisions that negatively impact individuals. The enforcement mechanisms in Section 8 are severe. Violations carry fines up to 5 crore rupees, the revocation of deployment licenses, and the threat of criminal liability for repeat offenses. The bill attempts to close the liability gap by taking abstract principles of AI ethics and encoding them as hard statutory requirements with severe financial penalties attached. But the political reality is that Bill 59 is a private member's bill. The actual trajectory of Indian technology law is being steered by the executive branch through the forthcoming Digital India Act. The government has calculated that passing a highly restrictive, standalone AI law could stifle domestic startup innovation and threaten the ambition of building a trillion-dollar digital economy. The prevailing strategy is to balance economic growth against targeted risk mitigation. Rather than broad, sweeping restrictions, the executive is aiming for surgical interventions. Under the Digital India Act, the state will not regulate artificial intelligence as a broad category. Instead, it will implement precise guardrails designed explicitly to contain deepfakes, misinformation, and high-risk algorithmic applications. To refine these specific guardrails, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology has initiated the Digital India Dialogues, extensive pre-drafting consultations with industry experts and policy stakeholders. The stated objective of this consultative process is to integrate India into global value chains as a trusted hub for digital products, ensuring regulation does not isolate the market. The absence of a standalone AI law is an intentional delay. It allows the government to avoid premature overregulation while steadily assembling a scalable, responsible governance model. While sweeping legislation takes time to draft, Indian citizens are currently caught in a dangerous interim period defined by severe evidentiary asymmetry. The technical data required to prove an algorithm malfunctioned, the audit logs, source code, and model weights, are held exclusively by developers as heavily protected trade secrets. Plaintiffs face an immediate procedural barrier. They lack the technical expertise to parse algorithmic data, and the legal mechanisms to compel a technology firm to open its black box during a civil dispute simply do not exist. India's institutional framework is currently strained by this asymmetry. Existing courts and consumer dispute forums do not have dedicated AI benches or the technical fluency required to evaluate complex statistical logic. If an opaque algorithm denies a citizen a mortgage or silently screens them out of a hiring pool, that individual hits a procedural wall. They cannot legally challenge a decision if the machine refuses to provide a human interpretable reason for it. Until the judiciary introduces specific procedural safeguards, such as rebuttable presumptions of causation that force developers to prove their systems operated correctly, seeking justice for algorithmic harm remains an insurmountable task. Resolving this accountability gap requires structural reform. India must transition from a technology-agnostic regime to one that explicitly maps the distinct complexities of the AI value chain. Legal scholars recommend a control-based liability framework. This model apportions responsibility strictly based on the actual degree of influence an actor exercises over the system's deployment and continuous learning. Additionally, the rigid statutory definitions of product and defect under the Consumer Protection Act must be expanded to encompass intangible software and continuously updating digital services. To address the judicial capacity gap, legal experts propose a phased dispute resolution approach. This begins by integrating dedicated technical specialists into existing courts to help judges interpret algorithmic evidence accurately. Liability law exists to enforce accountability. As critical economic and social decisions are handed over to non-deterministic machines, India must build the legal architecture required to ensure those systems answer for their mistakes.